Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations in Horror. I'm your main host, Kevin Powers. I'm also the creator, founder, and all around nice guy with Something Wicked Entertainment, which we do podcasts, movies, short movies, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, as long as we can entertain you for as little or as much time as I can possibly get you. Now, tonight, or today, whenever you are listening to this, on Conversations in Horror, during the month of October 2024 and Halloween, we are releasing a bunch of episodes, not only highlighting the Halloween franchise, but highlighting some of our favorite horror movies. And one of the ones we are talking about tonight is Oculus from Mike Flanagan, who is probably one of the premier horror directors out there now, doing a lot of great work. And this is one of his earlier films. So talking with me today is Sarah Panazzo, who has been on the show many times and is one of the special guests who loves to talk everything horror, and we love her for it. Thank you for showing up on our show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
And like the Oculus, I don't know if many people are watching this movie during the Halloween season, but it is a great film to enjoy during this season if you have never seen it. And I want to know exactly what was your first impressions of the film, and whether or not you were even aware of who Mike Flanagan was when you saw it.
So the first time I watched it, I don't believe I knew who Flanagan was. I think it was still pretty early in his whole thing. But the first time I watched it, I was like, it's a genius idea. It's very dark. It's very sad. I mean, the whole movie is like, is it mental health? Is it mental illness? Is it all about mental health? Or is it demonic possession, which is like some of the better ways to play it is it real or is it fake? But then coming back and watching this the second time was after he had all of his runs on Netflix with all of the wonderful TV shows he's done. And I am a huge fan at this point. So looking back on this and seeing this as like his beginning of his empire to now where he is, as I like to say, he has the keys to the Stephen Kingdom. Um, Man, this guy can keep putting out stuff as much as he wants, and I will watch it. I've watched Midnight Club, where it's just the kids stuff. I've watched all of his TV shows, all of his movies. It's just fantastic. Man knows how to write.
I will agree with you on that. I originally saw this not knowing who Mike Flanagan was either. I saw this at the theater because back then I used to watch every horror film that used to come out pretty much. But I like the concept of playing with mirrors and reflections and stuff like that. It's an old story trope that's been used in films throughout time, and I've always thought it was very interesting concept. So I was all for it. I did what I got when I saw the film was not what I was expecting. But the only thing I knew about the film before getting to know Mike Flanagan is Katie Sackhoff because of Battlestar
Yes.
Galactica and everything else she's done. I think she's a phenomenal actress, and seeing her in a horror film, this may have been one of her first ones, but she did like a string of great parts in mediocre horror films. Let's say that
Yes.
she did a lot of mediocre horror films for a while there, before she got back into television. And this is one of the ones I really enjoyed her and what she brought to the table in terms of the film itself. Everyone else I was not aware of, but after watching this at the theater, I was completely jaw dropped. And then I went out and saw or seeked out some of Flanagan's other films and got around to watching those and thought they were just as good. So that was my impression of Oculus. Besides the fact that when I first saw the movie, I had no idea what the hell Oculus was. So
No, same. And I loved Katie Sackhoff. She wasn't the reason why I originally watched the movie. I actually just had to look it up. But Karen Gillan was the reason I watched it because she had just gotten off of Doctor Who when this was coming out. So that was the main reason I had watched this movie. And then I was like, oh, it's Katie Sackhoff. And I mean, come on. The two of them in one movie like this is fantastic. I wish they would have had more time together because they are both wonderful leading ladies, but it is what it is.
oh my god, I feel so stupid now. That's where I recognized her from. was from Doctor Who. Oh
I
my
thought you were
god.
making that face at me. I was like, what are you talking about?
I was like, oh my, what am I? Holy shit, she was in Doctor Who. That's
Oh,
I feel so
Kevin.
bad. I feel so bad because that. Oh my god. So yes, okay. Now some of the pieces are. I haven't seen the movie since it was originally released. Despite the fact that I absolutely love this movie, I haven't seen it since it was originally released or before we redid or I rewatched it for this podcast. So I like it didn't even dawn on me that she was in Doctor Who before this movie. Mind blown, as I like to say sometimes. Um, I should rewatch some of these great movies more often. I will tell you that.
Yeah, it's so fun going back and realizing, like, oh, yeah, I remember when that person wasn't famous. And then all of a sudden now, like, the younger brother is Robin on uh Titans.
Oh,
Uh yeah, so it's just weird stuff like that. But I mean, it also has the like I don't even think this one really has that many carryover characters and actors to Flanagan's other movies. I think his wife is the only one who's really the carryover from this movie.
mm,
Um, but yeah, I mean the the casting on this is just it seems bizarre at first, but it's just so well done.
it is because it's a slow build, and that's how the suspense comes out between the characters, and the fact that it jumps back and forth between time periods until the lines start to blur a little bit. And that's one of the aspects I liked about this film that I kind of detest in some of the other films that try to make mirrors or reflections on an evil presence. The only other one I could think of that I really enjoyed was the way the movie Mirrors does it. The original movie Into the Mirror and the remake Mirrors, I both enjoyed the way they used this whole concept of reflections and mirror images. So
Well, I mean, mirrors in general are generally haunted items. There's a lot of folklore surrounding mirrors, like you're supposed to cover them during funerals and such, to prevent evil spirits from coming back over. I mean, mirrors reflect the best and worst parts of yourself and all that fun stuff. I mean, you can go on and on about the mythology of mirrors and what they mean and symbolize all the time. But yeah, in horror, they are at the heart of a ton of legends. I mean, you look at like Bloody Mary,
mm.
and you've got mirrors. You almost any
Candyman.
yeah, Candyman too. You look into a mirror and say somebody's name 3 times and it summons them. Um, I mean, you look at Us, you had the reflection of
Mm.
each other up and down from the ground, and then The Night House was also a great reflection movie. Um, I mean, looking in a mirror itself, your brain naturally distorts it, because it's you but flipped. So if you actually saw yourself in person, you wouldn't recognize yourself because it's not the you see, but it also flattens what you're seeing. So there's a lot of science behind it that makes it explain why it's like so creepy. Like they'll put people in rooms and have them stare at their reflection for 10 minutes and watch them lose their minds. But there's just the nature of mirrors themselves are extravagant. It's so fascinating.
It
It's
is.
one
And one of the things I had fear. So I don't know if you ever had fear when watching a movie like this, but before I saw this in the movies, I kind of got the impression, and there will probably be only handful of people who actually will understand what I'm about to say. But I think it was during the '90s when they were doing all the sequels to the Amityville franchise, Amityville films, the Amityville Dollhouse, the Amityville. It's about time. It was always about movie. Each one of those crappy sequels always had a haunted item in that came from the original Amityville house that then threw havoc and everything. This movie came off like that in the trailers when I saw it originally, and that was my greatest fear, is that it was going to be a freaking Amityville knockoff. And I was like, oh my god, I sat through the '90s watching these crappy Amityville horror movies, and my greatest fear was that. Thankfully, after watching the movie, my that was not what I got. But I'm hoping that when people saw this originally, that's not what they thought the movie was about, because this movie, because it didn't have any stars in it, because no one
yeah.
knew who Mike Flanagan was, it had a really steep uphill battle
Hmm.
with audiences. And to be honest with you, I can't even remember what the original reactions to the movie were. I don't know if it was
It
successful or not.
did relatively well. I had it written down here, but I mean, it had a budget of, where was it? It had a budget of like 4 or 5 million, and it went on to make 44 million.
Okay, so it was
So it
successful.
it made a decent amount of money. I mean, it was at TIFF. Um, so it did pretty well. I mean, it was pretty well promoted in the artsy circles as it like pre A24, like what you would guess. But I mean, it's definitely lasted because I mean, it's Mike Flanagan. He's everywhere now. And I mean, this mirror has now made an appearance in every single one of his projects.
Oh, has it?
It has. There's actually a couple of groups who follow and they'll try and be the first one who posts it. So like he actually made 3 mirrors for the movie. One of them ended up broken, which I believe is the one that is at the end. Um there's one in his home, which isn't terrifying enough. And then the third one actually travels or sits in storage and is used in other films. So like
That's kind of cool.
the head like Gerald's Game, the headboard of the bed was the mirror. Hill
Oh,
House, it was in the Statue Gardens. Absentia, he had his original one from his short that this was based on. Ouija, it was in one of the basement scenes. Doctor Sleep, it was in the Overlook. Bly Manor, it's in the attic. Midnight Mass, it's in the rec center stage. It's in the basement of the Midnighters Club, and then it's Verna's Bar in House of Usher. So it's kind of one of those little Easter eggs he's going to keep hiding. And I mean, if he keeps doing it cleverly, like Gerald's Game, where it's the bed frame, I mean, that's something fun to see because it's definitely a unique mirror.
hmm. Well, I've really enjoyed almost everything he's done. And Oculus was the one that got me interested in who he was beforehand. Because after I saw Oculus, I went back to see Absentia, which is another one I absolutely loved for a debut film or debut feature. I thought that was a really strong film, and he's done nothing but great films since there and television shows.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I've not seen all of his television shows like you have. I still need to catch up.
Yes, you do. You do, Kevin.
But I've seen all of his films except for maybe one. So I'm which I just realized I didn't know he did, so that's why I haven't seen it. Which is Before I Wake. I did not know he did that. So I still need to see that one. Other than that, I am a huge fan because his films and this, I saw this movie. I saw this style in this film. Is I really loved his style and cinematography, and it
Mhm.
shows in this film and in Hush, especially. Hush is a film that could have been really bad because of the concept, but he does a lot of cool.
He really does. And it's making such a huge comeback right now. I think it was the anniversary or something like that. So it has gone onto streaming as it hasn't before. I think it's on Netflix right now. And it had pulled huge numbers because everybody knows who he is now.
Oh yeah,
But I mean, it's a genius film. It's a
yeah.
genius concept. It was before a bunch of those other ones that came out where you had people trying to deal with the same thing.
Hmm. Yeah. It amazes me because I just started looking back over his career until he hit it off with Netflix. He made better films than you were expecting because I do remember Ouija Origin of Evil being much better than the first movie.
Hmm.
Uh, and even critics said that too. I think generally speaking, everyone thought that Ouija 2 was better than the first one.
Yeah.
And that's probably because his style in Oculus shows in every one of his films. And he's always been able to get a really strong cast.
Yes.
With this
He
film,
really does.
yeah, I mean, with this film, and we now know that he had both seasoned professionals and a couple of actors who went on to do much bigger stuff. Uh,
Hmm.
I'm bound to think that he is one of those rare talents where he knows how to direct actors, not just hire great actors. Because
Well,
films have both. His films and television series has a wide variety of both.
yes. And he's always introducing new people to his circle. But what I think really shows that he knows what he's doing is he directs, writes, edits, and ultimately creates almost all of these things. He's not just directing, he's not just writing. He is literally doing as much of it as he possibly can, to put himself there. And I know I've read a couple of his articles where he really writes what he knows and what he's dealing with. So like when he has those long soliloquies about like oh, what one was it? It was Midnight Mass. One of the main characters is trying to deal with alcoholism and stuff like that. And he went through that whole thing. He went through AA and tried to recover, and he writes what he knows. He wrote a bunch of stuff while he was sleep deprived after his first child was born, and he was trying to write out what he felt about that. And so a lot of it carries over. He really does write exactly what he is feeling, and it comes very natural. I mean, yeah, you get these long soliloquies and all these other parts which some people don't exactly enjoy, but he writes them so well. My favorite part about his writing in general is that everything could really just be a family drama, but he sprinkles in those little hints of like sci-fi fantasy that makes it a little bit more abnormal. Where you could really look at most of these and it's like I said earlier with this, like this could be about mental health, that
Yeah.
people could be schizophrenic. But you lean towards more real or more fantastic, and that's where you get Mike Flanagan.
Well, he does a really good job with this film balancing both those aspects. It almost feels like an exorcist film where you're trying to figure out, is it a mental health or is it really a demon possessing someone? This one, it has plays on that same concept, which is why
Yes.
our before we start the episode, we were talking about the Exorcist and what he'll be able to do with the Exorcist. Now he's taking control over that. He's already been playing with the concepts already. So it's one of those things where we can get excited for what he does, because not only is he a great filmmaker, but he'll be able to pull some of these kind of great story aspects to actually make it more personal and make it more appealing to general audiences, whereas other sequels to The Exorcist have failed miserably. Uh,
Yes. Yes, they have.
but I think you touch on something that I kind of forget, which is most of his films are about families who have going through, one or more characters are going through some type of dysfunction, and then
Mhm.
he adds in these supernatural elements that don't take over the story but are just a part of the story. Oculus I loved because it's essentially about a brother and sister, and they remember the incidents completely different.
Yes. Well, and it goes back to Haunting of Hill House. You said it earlier how he blends the time periods
Oh,
together, and he does that so well. And in Haunting of like this walk so Haunting of Hill House could run, because oh my God, you see so much stuff that meets right in the middle with the time periods flashing back and forth, the siblings seeing two completely different aspects of the same thing. And it's just beautifully done.
mm,
I mean, and the everything he writes is so like heartfelt and moving too. Like you really do feel for these characters as much as they're putting into whatever they are aiming towards. I mean, you get your general creepiness and your ghosts in the background, which is also really fun to play I Spy when you pause any of his projects, especially in like this, where you see like the people with like glowing eyes in the background and just everything. Whenever anything happens with the mirror, it's just generally creepy, but
it's
it
unsettling,
really
especially when you
is.
rewatch it.
Because like he doesn't do a lot of the like jump scares, but if he does, they're the tasteful jump scares, which I really enjoy.
No, that's a good point to make. The jump scares are not like they're just to make it to get the audience to react, but they're almost, and I wanted to say this out, say this in generally for all of his films, they're all character based.
Yes.
And that's why I think his films stand on a higher ground than a lot of other films, that they're not like plot driven, they're character driven.
Hmm.
So it not only makes the film stronger, but the audience can, I guess, empathize and go along with the story a little bit easier than if it was a simple plot-driven film.
Yes, because each character has their own thing going on, and you can identify with any of his characters that he ever writes. I mean, any of his large casts, too. You've got these large cast of wonderful people that all have completely different needs, wants, fears, dreams, and anybody can identify with any aspect of him at any point in whatever project he's working on.
Mm.
So it's very realistic.
Mm-hmm. And one of the great things about this film is that the brother and sisters, because they either remember incidents differently or one of them has been convinced that he remembers things differently. It's a constant psychological and physical battle between these two siblings, which kind of, because I grew up with multiple brothers and sisters, it's kind of like exactly the way we would actually argue.
Yes.
I remember something completely different than my sister, who remembers it differently than my other brother. And it was when I rewatched it. Now I don't think I saw this when I originally saw the movie. I saw it when I rewatched it. I started to pick up on stuff like this. I was like, oh shit, wow, I love the dynamic and the interplay between these brothers and sisters, because the brother and sister, because they're not seeing the same thing and they're each trying to convince the other one that they're right. Uh, and it's something that, like you brought up in the Haunting of Hill House, you see it in there too. I'm sure it's in a lot of these other projects that I haven't been able to delve deeper into the shows, but it's something I see in a lot of his other films.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things that I love about this is the memento-ness of this, where like they're still trying to convince each other what is going on, but at the same time, they themselves have no idea what's going on. And like when they start seeing themselves in the camera doing completely different things, and just like it finally clicks that this is real. This is really happening. And the sudden shift in quickness of how they're trying to fix this
Mm-hmm.
is very intense. Plus some of the gore, it's not like heavy duty gore, but like any nails pulling scene ends up just not making me be in a happy place. It's very unsettling.
Oh, geez. Okay. Since we've talked a lot about the actual mirror aspects of this film, and we've talked about how great the actors are, was anything in the film confusing in regards to the way that it bounced between time periods and bounced between the perspective of what could be real and what was fake?
So there were a few times, I think the first time I watched it, I had to pause it a handful of times because I was like, wait a second, that didn't just happen. Or I was like, but wait, why all of a sudden are they holding this? So like I also felt confused like the characters did in certain scenes when they realized that their bodies were doing things that they weren't aware of.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, I also questioned like, how did the police ignore all the parents' injuries and the chains in the bedroom after finding the initial incident when they were younger? I'm sitting here like, how much of it was actually imagined? Like, was their mother not really chained up to a wall? Was it something that they all, because everything else was very like mentally in place by the mirror itself. So like how much of what we actually saw from either child's perspective was real?
Mm.
And if the mirror can put you in those different places, did it really put the siblings in two different places where they saw those two completely different things? So there's a huge there's a lot of stuff.
Questions.
A lot of questions to break this down if you really want to get into it.
Well, the thing is, I don't think, and I don't think that all these questions are answered in the movie. I think it was designed for some of it to be open ended, but I also think that there is enough in there that doesn't distract from people or audiences believing that they're like plot holes. So that's the thing I'm trying to get at. There are a lot of people who would like to see these type of movies that says it's not explained correctly. That's just some plot hole or mix up or screw up that the filmmakers made. But I don't think I ever got that impression the first time I watched it or the time I just
Yeah.
watched it, because I understood a lot of it more the second time. When I first saw it at the theater, I only got to watch it once on the big screen, and that was it. When I rewatched it, I was able to sit down and see some of the stuff I didn't see the first time around. And I was like, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a little bit more sense. Oh, I can't tell if this is supposed to be real or if it's fake or if it's a little bit of both, but it doesn't take away from the story for me. And I always want to know uh, if for these type of films, if that takes away from the story for you and the audience.
It depends. So, like, I am always a huge fan of I don't want to see the monster because it's more horrific what you can imagine than what you can typically show on film most times. And then all of a sudden they show the monster and you're disappointed. Um, it's why like certain aspects of the thing work so well is you get like the dog scene where you don't really see the monster in full. There's all the shadows, there's a lot of movement. But everything in the dark is scarier because you can't see it. When it's brought into the light and you can see it, you can, okay, well, is it actually terrifying or is it just the chair in the corner? But with certain stories, especially like when you get those plot holes, there are the well-written parts where it's like you don't know
Mhm.
what happened or where this came from, and it leaves you wanting more. And sometimes it's better left unsaid, like the end of The Thing. Yet again, we talk about it to this day of what was the progression through the entire building? Who was the creature at the end of the movie? Was there even a creature at the end of the movie? And it's not a plot hole. It just leaves you wanting more because you know who does know? The writer themselves might not know exactly what happened. They just know these end points. Because you don't have to break down an entire universe in one movie to explain every single aspect, unless it's a really bad movie and you really do mess up. But like, this is not one of those at all.
I agree with you, and I don't think that Mike Flanagan does that at all in any of his films that I've seen so far. I think he likes to play with that concept a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But he does it so well that it's because it's integrated into the story in extremely creative ways. Now, we know that that's not always the case with a lot of movies, and then the audience leaves being pissed off or dismayed, or it's like, dude, we know it happens a lot. But I like to get the impression that on some of these great films that the filmmakers are doing a great job at keeping the audience on the edge of their seats while also leaving them at the theater with something to think about. Not
Yes.
not hammering, not something that they're questioning because they just didn't understand it, but something that they leave the theater thinking about and saying, huh, that's interesting. That
Yeah. I really enjoy that though in a movie. Like I want to remember like there's the occasional popcorn flick you want to go and see and like you can go see the horror movies where teenagers are murdered and there's jump scare after jump scare, or you can see like
the
a horror
nun.
or you can see a horror movie that makes you think and actually like question like what did they mean by this? How does that carry over to the real world? Oh my God, I'm losing my mind just staying up at night reading this endlessly. But those ones tend to stick with you and tend to transcend time. I mean, they've been going on like that forever. I mean, you look at Invasion of the Body Snatchers and everything else. Um, they live. I mean, I actually had a conversation with people at work a few weeks ago where they were like, yeah, Jordan Peele is like the greatest director because he's bringing like modern day problems to movies and it's never been done before. And I'm like, no, there's been subtext in horror for decades.
For
Like, it's not
decades.
all about teenagers getting murdered. And they were like, what are you talking about? And I was like, oh, honey, you've been watching the wrong movies.
Yeah, watch some John Carpenter films, watch some George Romero films, even go back and watch some Wes Craven films. Some of this stuff has been there forever, but it kind
Yes.
of gets overshadowed depending on the decade in which it was made. And a lot of and I hate to say this, a horror is more appreciated in hindsight than it is
Yes.
when it was originally released. I can't even think of a single movie other than Halloween that John Carpenter did that was successful. but everyone thinks his movies now are hugely influential. Between
Yeah,
They Live and The Thing and In the Mouth of Madness, all these movies did horrible at the box office. People didn't get them, but now you
I
talk about
know.
them, and everybody has seen these movies, and everybody can appreciate them now, and they have subtext to them. Mike Flanagan's films have that subtext. This one, mental illness. Like,
Hmm.
it's not the first movie to deal with mental illness, but it does it in a really creative way.
Yes, it really does. And he does that in quite a few of them. Like one of my favorite things, and it's what really sold me on him, was in Haunting of Hill House, the whole episode based on addiction and the ghost that haunts the twin brother, where it literally follows him down the street as he's like trying to recover. And it's like, yeah, addiction does cling to you like a ghost haunting you. And some of the work he does is just so beautiful. Like, I cannot speak highly enough about it. And it's just so well done. Uh, Midnight Mass is by far one of my favorites just because I love religious horror, and who really put together the equality of the uh the rising of Jesus Christ to vampirism. I mean, it was one of those things I never thought of until I watched it, and I was like, this is genius that this is an Easter TV show and it's about vampires, because the mirror of those two is just genius. But I could talk about Mike Flanagan's work all day.
We'll have to do an episode just on Mike. Is this our first Mike? I think this is our
It
first
is
Mike.
our first Mike Flanagan thing because we haven't talked
Not
about
any of his
any
work.
of his movies.
Oh, we have to definitely put Hush on there, and
Ugh,
I'm
Doctor
surprised.
Sleep has one of the most upsetting deaths I think I have ever seen in a horror movie.
I've been
And
trying to avoid doing that one because it's so modern, and it's one of the few modern horror movies
mhm.
that I think is really good and really strong. And so and everyone listening to the show knows that we try and not do too many modern ones because I believe that we haven't had enough hindsight and time to fully appreciate even the best of the horror movies that are being released now. But occasionally we will do them because I like to get it first impressions. I love hearing people's first impressions of horror movies. So
Plus, he just did have a segment come out with VHS Beyond that his wife actually directed and he wrote. So it's very interesting. It's very fun. It's very, very disturbing. But
yeah, well, I gotta watch that one, and we haven't actually done many. I think the only one
Alien
we've done is
films either.
anthology films. I think the only one that we've done is the one me and you did, which is Holidays.
Yeah, because there was that, and then Alien films in general, I don't think we've done many of either.
I don't think we've done any alien horror films, to be honest with you.
Kevin, come on.
Unless you want to count The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, I think is maybe the only one. And
Yeah,
that's a stretch. It's Alien, but really, we'll put some
but
more of those. And for everyone listening, we will put some more alien horror films on there. Okay. I would love to do Attack the Block. I know Attack the Block is on our list. We'll do that one eventually. But there are tons of great alien horror movies out there. We just haven't gotten around to them yet.
we'll just have to do a top 10 like we did our top 10 zombie movies, Kevin. I think it's the best way to handle it.
I think you have just did our next. Okay, there you go.
But I did find a couple of fun facts about this when he so given that this came out in 2013, right? I thought this tied in pretty well to what is going on with Mike Flanagan currently.
Okay.
But he was inspired by Stephen King's 1408,
Ah,
and basically uh his selling point for this, that his pitch for it was that imagine the Overlook Hotel, but you can hang it in your house.
really?
Yes. So he is very highly influenced by Stephen King and especially Lovecraft with uh a lot of his work as well. But I just thought it was so funny that like he sold this as like a Stephen King spin-off, and now he has done a handful of his project and is now producing like directing, creating like 2 or 3 other projects that are all Stephen King right now this year alone.
Yeah, no, isn't
So
that crazy?
so I was like, this is like the little kid who dreams big, and all of a sudden his he shot for the stars and he hit it. Um, but yeah, I mean it's fantastic.
He's going to become the modern day, like we were discussing a little bit earlier, actually.
Yeah.
The modern day version of Frank Darabont or Mick Garris, both
Yes.
of who have done a ton of Stephen King material. Mick Garris, a little bit, some are successful, some are not so successful, but he's done a ton of it. And of course, I don't think Frank Darabont has ever gone wrong with a single piece of King material.
Yeah, I mean, he was signed on to do what, like 3 or 4 of them, one right after the other in like the 80s, 90s.
Which ones? Oh,
Oh, because he did them. Yeah, they did like all of them, one right after the other. He had signed all of them at like the same time, and they said you had to make this certain number of films based on novels, and they kind of went from there, I believe. So,
hmm, I did not know that. I just assumed that because Darabont's first Stephen King property was more or less a dollar baby that just
yeah.
better than it should have been.
But the
Uh,
Dollar Babies is a genius concept. I
it
love it.
is, and I'm surprised no one else has ever done it, and he's still kicking them strong.
Hmm.
Anyone out? So if you're a filmmaker out there, check out Stephen King's Dollar Babies. I'm not going to go to it unless we do a Stephen King centric episode, but Frank Darabont did do one that is extremely famous. It got him started as a real director. It is an amazing film. You should be able to watch it hopefully anywhere by now. But I think it's called The Woman in the Room. I think it's called The Woman in the
I
Room.
think that's what it is, but
It's been a while. I used to have it on VHS. That's how long ago I had it. With double feature with the other Dollar Baby, The Boogeyman. So, which has been redone so many damn times, it's ridiculous. Uh,
oh, no, I must have been thinking of somebody else with his sign-ons. It's the guy who did Maximum Overdrive and everything else like that for
Maximum
Stephen King.
Stephen King did Maximum Overdrive.
There was another director who helped him about that time, but whatever. But no, I mean like Darabont did like Shawshank Redemption and
Yeah, The Mist and Green Mile. He did the
yeah,
less Stephen King like ones. Rob Reiner, I think, did Misery, and did he just
yes.
who did Stand By Me? I
I
so
don't know, but that's
sorry.
still such a good movie. I mean, anything Stephen King that is not even necessarily horror, that is more of like we said, like Green Mile,
Ah,
or oh my gosh, just any of those, just like Stand By Me, like just general stories are still fantastic.
yeah, yeah. And that's the thing is Stephen King. If for a lot of people out there who only know Stephen King for his horror stuff, directors kind of strive to everything that Stephen King wrote, even his non-horror stuff. Even like the can't think of the one that stars Anthony Hopkins in it for some reason. I can't think of that one. Stephen King was known for a lot of horror stuff, but he did some amazing work like that was adapted, like Stand By Me and Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile, which are not horror at all. And I can't think of the other one. I'm trying to think that has Anthony Hopkins in it. Oh God,
Yeah, it's I'm drawing a blank.
Hearts in Atlantis. Hearts in Atlantis. Jesus. And there's some amazing stories out there. Even Dolores Claiborne. These are for some reason major directors and even new directors like Louis Teague and the rest of them who started off with Stephen King material uh are inspired by some of the work that he has done. And it delves into their films, and sometimes they follow Stephen King's work, sometimes they don't. And when they don't, it's usually because Stephen King has no problems with anyone really, except for maybe Stanley Kubrick's version of The Shining, and the Lawnmower Man, who he wants to disown. But other than that, he allows people to do kind of what they want to do with his work. He doesn't really care. He's a great guy. He wants to let people explore. And Mike Flanagan's like the guy who was trying to make as perfect an example of a Stephen King novel as in film form, like Frank Darabont used to do. So when you watch Flanagan's future films, Gerald's Game, the one that no one thought would ever get adapted into a movie, he does a brilliant adaptation of that. I think, and that was a movie that I wish I could have done myself when I was younger and thought I could make movies. Gerald's Game was one of my favorite stories because I like the psychological warfare with the main character and stuff that she sees and doesn't see. I thought that was brilliant. Mike Flanagan did a great job because he understands character. Um, he understands character. Everything's character driven, and that's what makes Oculus so goddamn good.
Yeah, I mean, I had completely forgotten because it was one of my favorites, and I don't know how I do this every time, but Revival is one of my favorites by Stephen King, which is a religious horror. And it was one of the ones that Mike Flanagan had originally said, like, if I was going to do one movie by him, this is the one that I wanted to do. But it's not a big sell. Religious horror isn't big, but then he ended up doing Midnight Mass basically with it, because it is a fascinating topic.
I mean, he's got Stephen King. Is this new one out yet? I don't know when Life of Chuck is getting released.
No, I think it was just released at a festival, but it doesn't come out until spring, I want to say.
Yeah, I mean, he's got that, and then of course he's working on the king of all Stephen King stories right now. We all know, which is
yes, the Dark Tower.
Dark Tower. I was thinking of the Gunslinger, but it's not really the Gunslinger. It's the Dark Tower.
Yes, the Gunslinger is a part of the Dark Tower series.
Yes, and so if you want someone to do it right, hire Mike Flanagan.
Yeah, especially it's one of those things like when you're very passionate about a subject and you're going to go by the book. You might know enough of the subtext to expand a little at one point or another, but like you're not going to completely jump the shark.
No. I mean, I'm really fascinated to see what he does with the Life of Chuck. So
yeah, I mean, it was a weird short story, and I am very interested to see how they pull it off, especially with the size of the cast that they have. It's going to be phenomenal.
Oh, which links to this, obviously, because I didn't realize that Karen Gillan is in that too.
Yeah.
So there we go. We're linking it back to Oculus, and Mike is bringing back Karen Gillan for that. I don't know much about it other than it has Tom Hiddleston in it. Until now, I just looked it up, and I was like, oh, I could, because I remember hearing about it, but I wasn't sure if it was out, if it was coming out, what was happening. I kind of heard that he was shooting this in between when he was supposed to be shooting the Dark Tower. Yeah, that's what I heard. That's the stuff I heard. He kind of like shot this movie because he was so passionate about it. So.
Yeah, I mean, I said it the other day because we just watched the new Salem's Lot, but any of King's short stories can be a full movie, and any of his full novels need to be a mini series at least. There's just way too much. And so Life of Chuck is going to be perfect for that. But I'm looking at the cast right now, and he actually brings back a good chunk of his people and then some, because like you've got Tom Hiddleston, Karen Gillan, his wife Kate, Jacob Tremblay, who was in Doctor Sleep. Matthew Lillard's in it this time. Mark Hamill comes back. There's like 10 other people. I mean, it's a huge list of people that are just like, Nick Offerman's in it. Like, okay, just keep adding to the cast. I'll take it. I will.
I do believe that and hope that the quality of his storytelling that showed in Absentia and Oculus, and especially The Haunting of Hill House and now Midnight Mass, shines through both The Life of Chuck and his newest Stephen King project. Mostly because I feel that he is a filmmaker who is very passionate about the stories he spends time telling. If he wasn't passionate about it, he just wouldn't do it. And then I can't even think of one of his projects that I've seen that was not up to his standards or up to my standards of being great. I don't know about you. You've seen all the television shows, and I know he had the falling out with Netflix, which is unfortunate.
Yeah,
but I think this is one of the few horror filmmakers like James Wan that you just need to look out for because you never know what the hell
Mhm.
it's going to come up with next.
And I mean, it covers all different types of time periods, whatever. I mean, you got like Haunting of Hill House, which is very modern. You get Blind Manor, which is like way in the past. You get Fall of the House of Usher, which is very like modern, futuristic. And then you get the age gaps, the diversity in cast, aging, size, color, race, uh, gender, whatever. Like he covers every aspect of everything and makes each character unique. And like I said earlier, you can find yourself in almost every single one of his projects. You can find bits and pieces. Um, because yeah, it is quite all over the place, but it's all very well done.
So what I'm trying to hear from Panazzo, everyone, is that she thinks that we should do more Mike Flanagan films, and I need to add them to our list, is what I hear. And after today's episode, I will definitely add more to the list. Not only because I now think that we haven't covered enough of Mike Flanagan or his films, but also because he is one of the modern day horror filmmakers who I think needs to be explored more, and his films to see even a wider audience. As much as I love Oculus, I don't really hear a whole bunch of my
No.
friends talking about Oculus, much less Absentia, which I think is a brilliant debut film.
Yeah,
There,
like Gerald's Game, people started like whispering about him. And then with Doctor Sleep is when I feel like people actually started to take him seriously as a filmmaker.
yeah, because I hear about Hush, but not because of Mike Flanagan. I hear
Yeah.
about Hush because of the concept and the fact that it did extremely well when no one thought it was going to do well streaming. Before I Wake, unfortunately, I haven't seen. I didn't even realize he had done Before I Wake. But I think with The Haunting of Hill House, which a lot of people know of,
Hmm.
Blythe Manor, Midnight Mass is another one I hear a lot about. And the Midnight Club, unfortunately, was canceled due to the Netflix thing. Um, but I think with the Dark Tower series, I think that will elevate him, and hopefully people will go back and watch some of these great films that he did beforehand. That's just,
Hmm.
you know. So, any other thoughts from you, Panazzo, in regards to either Oculus the film or Mike Flanagan, the director of many great films and TV shows and everything else?
Everything else. Uh, if Mike Flanagan happens to listen to this, keep up the great work. You're fantastic. I mean, I feel like I'm watching Carpenter from the beginning, just expanding into greatness. So I'm very interested to see how far he can go.
That is a great comparison. Carpenter, because that dude, as much as we in hindsight we see that he's done a lot of different stuff, but when he was coming out, no one knew what he was going to bring from one film to the
Nope.
next. He'd do a sci-fi film at one point. He'll do Assault on Precinct 13, which is a western in a freaking police station. Then he'll go off and do Halloween, or he'll delve into the devil and the devil and I forget what they call the science that's in Prince of Darkness, but you get that science and the devil in the same movie and stuff that you're not expecting from
No.
anybody, much less John Carpenter, because you think that he's just going to do a slasher movie, and then he pulls that shit out. I think for Mike Flanagan, I think you're right. I think Mike Flanagan, you don't know what he's going to do from one moment to next, because I believe that the house on I was about to say House on Haunted Hill. uh,
Close.
the Hill House and Blythe Manor are so different from one another, and I think
Hmm.
some people thought that they should be more or less the same. Which is why you get a different reaction for both of them, and then of course House of Usher, which is different. And Midnight Mass, which I haven't seen. Now I need to really, really, really see it.
Yes.
And of course the Midnight Club with the younger characters, which is something I'm sure no one was expecting from them. Or the life of Chuck in the Dark Tower,
Dark
like
Tower, yeah.
dark fantasy. What Doctor Sleep. Who the hell knew that Although he's really good at doing sequels, obviously, because he did fucking Origin of Evil, and then he did this, which is just as good as Stanley Kubrick's version, if not more entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
Say that.
But that's a whole other movie I could talk all day about, and the wonderful blending of Stephen King and Kubrick, and then a little bit of Flanagan himself.
If we could have gotten all three of them together, it would have been great. But, unfortunately, Stanley Kubrick only really did the one horror movie, which he doesn't really call a horror movie. And Stephen King hated it I don't know if he still hates it or not, but he hated it for so long. But, I don't think Kubrick ever did another horror film after that either.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah, and I don't even think he'd call it a horror film. A psychological thriller is what that is. It's not a horror movie. Because he did elevated movies back then. Stanley Kubrick's our elevated director. He doesn't do horror movies.
Well, and if you really want to get into it, Kevin, it's why Flanagan did it so well. Was it a family mental illness, or was the place really haunting and possessing people?
Yeah.
I mean, it goes so deep.
Yes, it does. Well, since one of the characters gets a blade stuck in her head into the mirror, yeah.
Yeah.
There are some gruesome moments, and they're really well done. Thank you, Mike Flanagan, for doing all that, because we need those moments as horror fans. Psychological ones are what keeps us watching it. What tells us as an audience that we can watch these type of films, be uncomfortable by these type of films, but feel for the characters because it seems realistic and not too supernatural. But then you give us the gore too, so you entertain us a little bit. So if that's all you have to say about this, I am actually going to hold off saying any more about Mike Flanagan, because I think we talked about that enough for this episode. But I definitely going to bring him back for when we do, because Hush is going on the list.
Yes.
And Absentia is going on the list. And maybe Dr. Sleep in a little bit from now.
If not, if you need a Easter special, I am all for doing Midnight Mass.
We haven't done a show yet. We just do movies. But if we decide to change our minds, I will let you pick the show. It's hard to do a show. It's multiple episodes.
It really is.
I haven't figured that one out yet. So if anyone out there is really wanting us to do a show, please let us know, because right now we think that would be a very hard concept to pull off in our format. But I'm open to it. So with that, I want to thank you, Panazzo, for joining us for Conversations in Horror. Everyone out there who's been listening, please go check out Mike Flanagan's Oculus, Mike Flanagan's Absentia, Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep, Mike Flanagan's, just check out anything that Mike Flanagan has done. We wish Mike Flanagan nothing but continued success, and we look forward to his next couple films. With that, have a great day, and thank you for joining us at Conversations in Horror during this Halloween October month of horror. Have a good day, everyone. Conversations in Horror is a Broken Lighthouse Pictures production, produced by Kevin L. Powers, executive produced by Kelly A. Inoka, and originally filmed via Zoom technology. Conversations in Horror is hosted by Kevin L. Powers and co-hosted by various horror film lovers and filmmakers. To learn more about Mr. Powers, please make sure to check out his Patreon page and other social media platforms. Conversations in Horror is copyright 2024 Broken Lighthouse Pictures production.